There's a version of Caitlin Clark's story that everyone knows. The logo threes, the sold-out arenas, the highlight reels that broke the internet before she ever played a single professional minute. The endorsement deals, the television ratings, the cultural conversation she triggered just by showing up and being exactly who she already was. That version is real. That version is documented. That version is undeniable. But that's not the story we're telling today. Because somewhere behind the noise, behind the cameras and the comparisons, and the weight of an entire league repositioning itself around one person in real time, there's a different conversation happening. A quieter one, a private one. The kind that doesn't get replayed on highlight shows or dissected in mainstream sports media, because it happened behind closed doors, between two people who understood something that almost nobody else in basketball could fully grasp. What Larry Bird told Caitlin Clark wasn't about her jump shot. It wasn't about her footwork or her release point or the geometry of her pull-up from 30 feet. It was about something far more dangerous than any of that. Something that has ended the careers of players with more raw talent than either of them ever had. He talked to her about survival. About what happens to a generational player the moment the entire world decides you're not just supposed to be great, you're supposed to stay great indefinitely, under conditions that would break most people before halftime. And what he told her wasn't inspiration, it was a warning. Because Larry Bird has spent 40 years watching talented players get destroyed by exactly the thing that was already building around Caitlin Clark. And he wasn't about to let it happen again without saying something first. To understand why Bird's words carried the specific weight they did, you have to start with geography, because the parallels between these two players are not a media construction. They're not something a marketing team invented to sell a narrative. They're structural, they're historical, and they're so precise that it genuinely feels like the basketball universe ran the same experiment twice, 4 decades apart, just to see if it would produce the same result. Bird is from French Lick, Indiana, population barely 2,000 at its peak, a town so removed from the spotlight that Bird himself once said the biggest entertainment growing up was figuring out new ways to shoot a basketball in the driveway because there wasn't much else to do. No AAU circuits, no recruiting services, no social media presence curated from the age of 12 to build a brand before you're old enough to drive. Just a kid from a struggling family in a small Midwest town who loved basketball so purely and so obsessively that he became the greatest forward the sport has ever produced. Clark is from West Des Moines, Iowa. Different state, same DNA. The kind of place where nobody cares about your brand or your trending topics or how many times your name appeared in a headline this week. They care about whether you showed up, whether you competed, whether you were the same person in the fourth quarter that you were in the first. That Midwest work ethic isn't something either of them had to be taught. It was already in the water. But the geographic parallel is actually the least important one. The one that matters is what both of them walked into when they turned professional. When Bird entered the NBA in 1979, the NBA was in genuine crisis. This isn't a romanticized exaggeration. NBA Finals games were being broadcast on tape delay because the networks didn't believe enough people cared to justify primetime slots. Attendance was declining in multiple cities. The casual American sports fan had largely disengaged, and the NBA existed somewhere in the cultural margins between football season and baseball season, struggling to justify its own relevance. Professional basketball needed something seismic. It needed a reason for people to care again. It got two. Bird and Magic Johnson arrived in the same draft class, and their rivalry didn't just revive the NBA, it built the entire economic foundation that professional basketball in America still sits on today. Every billion-dollar television contract, every global brand partnership, every sold-out arena in every city that now treats its NBA franchise like a civic institution traces a direct line back to what Bird and Magic created for a league that was quietly dying.
Fast forward to 2024, and the WNBA was sitting in an eerily familiar position.
talented players, genuinely elite competition, a product that the hardcore fan respected deeply, and the casual viewer couldn't be bothered to engage with. The league didn't need another good player, it needed a catalyst, someone whose presence alone would fundamentally alter the economic equation of women's professional basketball overnight. Someone who would make people who had never watched a WNBA game before sit down and pay attention. Caitlin Clark was that catalyst, and the numbers prove it in a way that no amount of debate or opinion can override. When she missed time in early 2025 with an injury, WNBA television ratings didn't just decline, they collapsed by 55%. Not a dip, not a statistical fluctuation, a 55% crater the moment one player wasn't on the screen. That number tells you something that transcends every argument anyone has ever made about whether Clark's impact is real or media manufactured. The WNBA's commercial viability at this specific stage of its growth is architecturally dependent on her presence in a way that has no modern parallel in women's professional sports. Larry Bird saw this immediately. He recognized it the moment it started happening because he had lived it. He was the last person in the history of professional basketball to carry that specific burden, the weight of being the reason people buy tickets, the reason television contracts get signed at the numbers they get signed at, the reason your teammates' paychecks exist at the level they do, all while simultaneously being the target of every veteran in the league who resents the attention you're receiving, and every opponent who understands that knocking you down is the fastest path to making their own name mean something. When Bird sat down with Clark, he came with a very specific purpose, and it had nothing to do with her jump shot. Here is the core of what Bird shared with Clark, pieced together from people close to both camps, league insiders who were present for portions of these conversations, and Bird's own public statements that have surfaced across multiple interviews since. His message centered on something he called the silence of the greats. And to understand why that concept was so important, you have to understand what Clark looked like before she received it. In her first months as a professional, Clark was reactive, understandably so given what she was walking into every single night, because the physicality she was experiencing wasn't just normal rookie hazing, it was targeted, calculated, a coordinated effort by veterans across multiple teams to test whether she could be rattled out of her own game before she ever fully established it. She was being fouled hard on drives, grabbed on screens in ways officials consistently let slide, shoved on cuts, hit in ways that crossed the line between competitive basketball and something more deliberate. The list of players who went at Clark with extra force during that first professional season is long and well documented, and the league's unwritten code had always permitted veterans to put rookies through this kind of physical examination before deciding whether they'd earned the right to be protected. The problem was that the code was being applied to Clark with a ferocity and a consistency that went well beyond anything resembling a standard initiation. And Clark reacted. She argued with referees in ways that were visible to every camera in the building. She showed frustration on the court that opponents read and filed away for future use. She let the noise from social media debates and online narratives seep into her decision-making during games, forcing shots at moments when her basketball IQ was actually telling her to make the simple play. She was playing angry instead of playing smart, and the distance between those two things is enormous. It's the distance between a player who eventually burns out under the accumulated weight of pressure and a player who learns to convert that pressure into a competitive advantage so sharp it becomes terrifying. Bird had been that exact player. He knew what it looked like from the inside because he had stood in it himself. He'd been the rookie that every veteran in the NBA wanted to physically and psychologically test in 1979. The player that the league simultaneously needed to survive and quietly resented for arriving and changing every power dynamic in the room. He knew what it felt like to be the person whose presence altered everything: the ticket sales, the television deals, the endorsement conversations, the salary structures, all of it shifting because of one player,
and then walking into a locker room full of veterans who had been in the league for years and suddenly found themselves playing second fiddle to someone who hadn't earned a single paycheck yet. Don't beat them with your mouth, beat them with their own expectations. That was the essence of what Bird delivered. He told Clark that the moment she visibly shows frustration, she is handing the people who are targeting her exactly what they came for. Every argued call, every flash of visible emotion directed at an opponent or a referee, every reaction that ends up on camera and gets clipped and circulated and debated for 3 days, all of it is a win for the other side. Because they are not trying to beat her on the scoreboard, they know they can't beat her on the scoreboard. They are trying to beat her psychologically. They are trying to pull her out of the specific mental state where her game operates at its absolute highest level and drag her down into an emotional fight that is completely beneath her actual ability.
Bird drew directly from his own history. He reminded her of the Celtics-Lakers rivalry in the 1980s, the most commercially significant and intensely competitive rivalry in NBA history. Magic Johnson was the smile, the warmth, the charisma that made you feel like watching him play basketball was a privilege you tell your grandchildren about. Bird was something different entirely. Cold, where Magic was warm. Calculating, where Magic was instinctive. Silent in a way that communicated more genuine contempt and competitive menace than any trash talk ever produced by anyone in the sport. He told Clark she had the assassin's gene. She was born with it, the way Bird was born with it. But she was wasting it, spending it on arguments with officials and reactions to social media narratives and emotional responses to opponents who genuinely weren't worth the energy she was giving them. He told her that in professional sports at the highest level, respect isn't exchanged in pre-game handshakes or post-game interviews. It's taken during the game itself. And the way you take it isn't through volume or visible emotion or public complaints about how you're being treated. You take it by being so consistently and devastatingly effective that the people who doubted you are forced to sit in the silence of having been completely wrong. You don't need them to admit it. You don't need the validation or the apology or the public acknowledgement. You need the scoreboard. And you need the patience to let the scoreboard do every single thing you'll ever need said on your behalf. That message landed on a mind that was built to receive it. And what happened next is visible in every statistical and behavioral category Clark produced from that point forward. To truly understand the impact of what Bird's mentorship actually produced on the court, you have to go past the box score and get into the film. Because what Clark did after that conversation wasn't just an attitude adjustment or a mental reset, it was a complete geometric restructuring of how she plays basketball. And when you watch the tape from before and after side by side, the transformation is so dramatic that it genuinely looks like two different players wearing the same jersey. Before the meeting with Bird, Clark was playing under the immense pressure of being the Caitlin Clark brand. She was forcing the logo 3 at suboptimal moments, often not because the shot was the right basketball play, but because she could feel the crowd's expectation pressing down on her, and the shot was what thousands of people had paid to see. She was playing highlight reel basketball, the kind that generates extraordinary social media clips and fills arenas and builds a personal brand, but also leads to a volatile assist-to-turnover ratio and inconsistent offensive efficiency across a full 40-minute game. She was playing for moments rather than outcomes, and while the moments were genuinely spectacular, the results across full games were uneven in ways that better-prepared opponents could exploit if they were patient enough. Then came the intervention. Reportedly, Bird stripped the game down to its most fundamental and honest form. He looked at her and said something that only a player with his specific basketball intelligence could say and have it land with full credibility. "Caitlin, you're the only person on the court who knows where everyone is at all times, including the defenders. Right now, you're playing their game by giving them the shots they expect from you. Stop playing their game." Clark started moving the ball approximately 2 seconds earlier than she had been.
2 seconds sounds like an insignificant adjustment. In basketball, it is an eternity. It is the precise difference between a double team arriving fully formed and a double team being a half step late. It is the difference between a contested shot against 2 committed defenders and a wide-open teammate with a clean look. It is the difference between playing directly into the defense's prepared scheme and dismantling that scheme before the defense can finish executing it. She began hitting the ahead pass the moment she crossed half court, finding the corner shooter the instant the double team committed its weight in her direction. Rather than trying to split the trap or shoot over it or use her handle to navigate through it, she effectively neutralized the blitz that every team in the league had been deploying against her since her first professional game. Defenses that used to swarm her at the timeline were suddenly terrified to leave their assignments because Clark had learned to punish overcommitment faster than any rotation in the league could recover from it.
This is the quality that people talk about when they make the Bird comparison seriously, and not just as a compliment. Bird was a master of manipulating defensive schemes without even possessing the ball. He could stand completely still at one spot on the floor and pull 2 defenders toward him purely because of the threat he represented. His gravity bent the entire geometry of the offensive half court. Clark began to mirror this almost perfectly after the adjustment. She stopped trying to beat the double team through individual brilliance. She started using the double team itself as a weapon against the defense that had deployed it. The biggest immediate beneficiary was Aaliyah Boston. With Clark drawing every defense's attention and then immediately punishing overcommitment with precise entry passes, the lane opened for Boston in ways it simply hadn't before. Post-entry angles that had been clogged all season cleared. Boston's efficiency in the paint jumped measurably because Clark had learned to deliver the ball to exactly the spot Boston needed it, at exactly the moment when the defensive rotation was a half step behind where it needed to be. The Fever transformed from a predictable one-woman show into a multi-dimensional offensive system that could hurt you in 5 different ways simultaneously. Kelsey Mitchell started getting cleaner looks because defenders were preoccupied tracking Clark. Sophie Cunningham's three-point shooting became genuinely dangerous because help defense couldn't sag off her to crowd the paint. Lexi Hall found open space more consistently because 2 defenders were following Clark's movement instead of rotating to her position. Bird saw something specific in Clark that he recognized intimately from his own playing days. A basketball IQ so elevated that it was actually creating friction with her own teammates early on. In the 1980s, Bird used to deliver passes to spots on the floor that his Celtics teammates hadn't reached yet because he was already reading the play 2 full moves ahead of where everyone else was processing it. His teammates were still evaluating the current situation, while Bird was already executing the solution to the next one. He taught Clark what he described as the art of the attainable, how to simplify the game for the players around her by putting the ball exactly where they needed it at the pace they could process, while keeping the full complexity of every read and every decision entirely inside her own head. She stopped playing against the opposing defense. She started playing with the fabric of the game itself, manipulating angles, controlling tempo, dictating the terms of every possession, not through spectacle, but through an invisible intelligence that the other team couldn't prepare for because they couldn't see it coming. Bird's on-court coaching was transformative, but what he said publicly about Clark's value forced a conversation that the WNBA had been carefully avoiding for years. In a significant 2025 interview, Bird argued that Caitlin Clark shouldn't be viewed as a player, she should be viewed as a franchise. He drew a direct comparison to his own arrival in the NBA in 1979, when the league was hemorrhaging viewers and revenue, and his presence alongside Magic Johnson's fundamentally reversed the trajectory of professional basketball in America. He didn't soften his language when addressing the treatment Clark had received from her WNBA veterans during her first 2 professional seasons. He drew a straight line from his experience to hers and held it there without any diplomatic cushioning. When I came in, the veterans hated me too. They didn't like the attention, and they certainly didn't like a rookie taking the spotlight. But the smart ones eventually shut up. They realized I wasn't there to take their spot. I was the reason their paychecks were going to double. That statement landed in the basketball world with the force of a controlled detonation. Because Bird wasn't simply defending Clark from her critics, he was simultaneously indicting every veteran who had targeted her, every commentator who framed the physical treatment she endured as a legitimate rite of passage, and every person inside the WNBA structure who treated the league's single most commercially valuable asset as a threat to manage rather than an opportunity to maximize. He called Clark a rising tide. The implication was unmistakable and deliberate. Every player in the WNBA benefits from Clark's presence, whether they publicly acknowledge it or not. The television contracts are larger because of her. The sponsorship deals flowing across the entire league are more lucrative because of her. The arenas are fuller across the board because of her. The salary cap is expanding because the revenue she generates creates the economic foundation that supports higher wages for every player in the league, including the ones who spent 2 seasons trying to make her life as difficult as possible. Fighting Caitlin Clark, Bird argued plainly, is fighting your own bank account. And the veterans who were intelligent enough to recognize that dynamic in 1979 are the same kind of people who will eventually recognize it now. The ones who don't recognize it in time will simply watch their opportunity pass them. But Bird went further than the economic argument during those private sessions. He told Clark something that represented a complete psychological rebranding of how she understood herself and her role in the sport. You aren't just playing for the Indiana Fever. You are the CEO of this league's future.
That framing changed something fundamental in how Clark carried herself from that moment forward. She stopped investing energy in winning over veterans who had decided before she ever played a professional game that they were going to resent her existence in the league. She stopped managing her fame carefully to avoid offending the people around her. She stopped treating her cultural impact as something that needed to be minimized in order to make her teammates feel comfortable. Instead of managing her gravity apologetically, she started using it as a weapon, recognizing that what she does to defenses on the court, bending them, pulling them, creating space where there was none, is simply the athletic version of what she does to the entire league's commercial infrastructure. She is the gravity. And Bird was the first person with the credibility and the specific personal history to tell her directly, stop fighting that. That framing changed something fundamental in how Clark carried herself from that moment forward. She stopped investing energy in winning over veterans who had decided before she ever played a professional game that they were going to resent her existence in the league. She stopped managing her fame carefully to avoid offending the people around her. She stopped treating her cultural impact as something that needed to be minimized in order to make her teammates feel comfortable. Instead of managing her gravity apologetically, she started using it as a weapon, recognizing that what she does to defenses on the court, bending them, pulling them, creating space where there was none, is simply the athletic version of what she does to the entire league's commercial infrastructure. She is the gravity. And Bird was the first person with the credibility and the specific personal history to tell her directly, stop fighting that reality, start leveraging it. The full results of Bird's mentorship became undeniable during the 2025 postseason, and what the league saw walking onto the court in those playoff games was not the same Caitlin Clark that had shown up in the spring of 2024. The frantic energy was gone, the reactive patterns were gone. The visible frustration that opponents had learned to trigger was simply absent. In its place was something different, something quieter and considerably more dangerous. The poise was immediately visible. You could see it in the first possession of every playoff game, the way she brought the ball up court without urgency, without the compulsion to prove anything on the first touch, without the need to force a logo 3 in the opening minute because the arena was expecting one.
She played with the patience of someone who had fully internalized that a basketball game lasts 40 minutes, and the fourth quarter is the only one that becomes mythology when the scoreboard is close. The killer instinct was sharper, not louder, sharper. She started deploying what teammates and reporters began calling the bird stare, the silent trash talk that requires 0 words and communicates everything. It was visible in the way she'd pull up from the logo, release the shot with complete calm, and then hold the follow-through with an expression that told the defender, the crowd, and anyone watching at home that she knew the outcome before the ball left her hand. The defenders knew she knew, and the silence of that specific confidence was more devastating than any celebration or any argument she could have possibly delivered. She stopped arguing with referees entirely. This is the detail that coaches and analysts noticed first, because it represented the single most visible behavioral change across her entire professional career to that point. The Caitlin Clark who had accumulated technical fouls and engaged in visible running debates with officials throughout her rookie season simply ceased to exist. In her place was a player who absorbed contact, processed the no call, and responded by executing the next possession with surgical precision. She didn't need the call. She didn't need the official's validation or acknowledgement. She needed the scoreboard, and the scoreboard was the only authority she was willing to recognize. By the time the Fever reached the deep rounds of the postseason, the transformation Bird had seeded was complete and fully operational. Clark wasn't just playing basketball anymore, she was conducting it. Running an offensive system that moved like a precision instrument, finding teammates in positions they hadn't anticipated being in, controlling the tempo of games, the way a grandmaster controls a chessboard by processing 3 moves ahead of every other person on the floor. The deep playoff run wasn't built exclusively on spectacular individual performances, though those arrived when the moment demanded them. It was built on something harder to market and harder to replicate: the accumulated intelligence of a player who had learned from the greatest forward in NBA history to stop wasting her IQ on things that didn't matter and focus it entirely on dismantling the things that did.
The physicality didn't stop during the playoffs. The hard fouls didn't stop. The deliberate targeting didn't stop. But Clark's response to all of it changed so completely that the original strategy became irrelevant. She absorbed it in silence. She answered it with production. And by the time the final buzzer sounded on the postseason, the players who had spent 2 years dedicated to rattling her were the ones who looked rattled. Because nothing, not the fouls, not the physicality, not the psychological pressure they had applied consistently for 2 full seasons, was working anymore. And the quiet on Clark's face in those final moments told them everything they needed to know about where the power in that dynamic had permanently shifted. What Larry Bird recognized in Caitlin Clark from the very beginning was never simply talent. The league has had talented players. Talent alone doesn't move television ratings by 55% in either direction. Talent alone doesn't rebuild the economic infrastructure of a professional sports league. What Bird recognized was timing, the specific, rare, almost impossible to engineer convergence of an extraordinary player arriving at the exact historical moment when an entire sport is desperate for someone exactly like them. The kind of timing that bends systems, that reshapes what institutions believe is possible for themselves, that quietly rewrites the ceiling for everyone who comes after. Clark has that timing. Bird had it. And because Bird had it, he was the only person alive who could look at Clark and explain to her precisely what it meant to carry it and what it would cost her if she tried to carry it the wrong way. But here's what makes this story genuinely unsettling as you sit with it. The transformation is complete. The lessons have been absorbed. The psychological rewiring is done. Clark is no longer playing the game everyone else is playing. She is playing a version of basketball that operates one level above the frame everyone else is using to understand it. And the question that follows naturally from that is the one that nobody in the league has a comfortable answer to yet. If one private conversation between a retired legend and a second-year professional produced this level of transformation, what does the next conversation break open? What does Clark look like in year 4, year 5, year 6, when the lessons have had time to compound and the instincts have had time to calcify into something that no defense can game plan for and no veteran can rattle out of her? And perhaps most unsettling of all, when a player learns to control silence as fluently as she controls the scoreboard, when she's no longer reacting to the league, but the league is reacting to her, who exactly is still in control? Because from where things stand right now, the answer to that question is becoming less complicated by the day. And the people who built their entire strategy around Caitlin Clark eventually breaking under the pressure are starting to realize, quietly and uncomfortably, that she never broke. She just got very, very patient.